Hi everyone, welcome to the Calling Within podcast. Today I've got the lovely Yvie Sanchez with me. Yvie is a hypnotherapist, a trauma-informed therapist, and also a former sales trader. Yvie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I love the work that you do, and we're going to go into all the kind of heavy but also very necessary topics like trauma, emotions, spirituality behind it, hypnosis, all those kind of amazing things that you do, and I'm very excited for this conversation.
Me too. Really excited. A bit nervous, but it's going to be amazing.
It's going to be great. And to begin this conversation, for listeners that are not familiar, what is trauma and how does it affect the body?
Okay, so trauma has had such a bad rap for so many years, and people associate like bad things that happen to you. But trauma is not necessarily what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. But it's also what should have happened that didn't happen. So something like emotionally attuned caregivers and parents and having your needs met as a child can also result as trauma. So that's kind of starting to change the way trauma is looked at right now, because before you would associate it with an accident or with veterans of war, or things that were like huge, and everybody would say, I've never had anything big, so there's not trauma. But there's big T trauma and there's what they call little T trauma. I don't think it should be called little T trauma because I think it's all trauma. But the good news about that as well is that because it's something that happens inside of you, you can do something about it. Whereas if it was something that happened to you, it's happened, it's in the past, and you can't change it, you can't do anything about it. So understanding that trauma is something that happens at the level of the body, and it's our response to the events outside of us, then we've got some kind of chance of getting our power back, in a sense, and working through that trauma. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, what do you mean it happens at the level of the body? Like, how does it manifest physically?
Well, it manifests in all sorts of different symptoms for people. So it can manifest, it's a dysregulation of it's a disconnect from self. And so when we're disconnected or dysregulated and our nervous system dysregulated, it's going to kind of cause havoc within our body. It means that we go into a different state. So a state of fight or flight. Probably your listeners have probably heard of fight or flight, and we have 4 different responses, which will be fight, flight, freeze, where we can't fight the danger, we can't run away from it, so we get frozen. And then a more extreme one, which would be fawn, where we just completely pass out, or our nervous system becomes completely overwhelmed and it shuts us down. And you've probably seen animal documentaries where a rabbit or a deer is about to get attacked and it's got nowhere to go and it just kind of like keels over. And then once the danger passes, it kind of like gets on and just is able to release that. As human beings, we haven't been taught how to release that energy. And so it just gets stuck within the body. And if it's not processed, and what I mean by process is somebody being able to provide that holding, or to just let you process and integrate what's happened to you, then that keeps getting activated because your nervous system keeps activating you into that state of survival, which is pretty much what trauma is. It just means that our nervous system will just keep getting activated constantly because it's not being allowed to process it. So that's what I mean about at the level of the body, is our nervous system going into that survival state. And then that being switched on constantly, and we're not designed to have that nervous system activation constantly. And so, yeah, it can produce all sorts of different things. For people, it produces illnesses. It can affect you emotionally, so anxiety, depression, OCD, all sorts of different things it can manifest. And that's all kind of a result of that disconnect and that dysregulation within our body.
Wow. Would it be fair to say that certain events in somebody's life can be traumatic for some people, but for some people, the way they take it in, it doesn't result in trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's just because something happened doesn't mean that you're going to be traumatized by it. Because if you have somebody after that traumatic event that will help you integrate and process that trauma, then it doesn't stay in the body and you're able to release it. So it's definitely at the level of the body. Obviously, there's more to it, but having somebody help you process that is just like such a key piece. And there's Peter, I don't know if people listeners have heard, but Peter Levine is really well known in the field of trauma. And he talks about in one of his books about what he had an accident, a car accident. I can't remember if it was a car accident, but he was in an accident. And somebody came to the scene before the paramedics came, and he started to shake. And normally our impulse as it would be to just calm them down, but actually he asked the person to let him just shake it out. And it just meant that his body did what it needed to do in order to release what was happening in his body, and that meant that he was didn't get traumatized by that event. And that happens with quite a few people. And so not just because you went to Afghanistan or you were in Iraq doesn't mean that everybody is going to get PTSD. It has to do with your background, it has to do with all sorts of different things. And the people that get traumatized, it really is what sort of childhood did they have? What sort of support system do they have when they do get back home after serving? So there's all sorts of different elements. So not because something happens to us does it mean that trauma is there.
Wow. Yeah. And sometimes I think, and I can relate as well, like if you didn't have something ordinarily traumatic happen to you, like a car accident, you didn't go to war. For example, if your childhood needs weren't met, they can also result in trauma. And most of us don't even know that it's trauma.
Absolutely.
And then we'll look at those symptoms. Like, for example, for me, anxiety and stress and depression. I'm like, what is beneath all that? And then once you do the therapy work, once you do kind of awareness, meditation work, hypnosis, you're like, oh my God, like this is probably stems from that. And it makes so much sense. And not to add extra pressure on the parents, but your childhood is so important, just from a physiological and psychological point of view. It's crazy that it just has such a tremendous effect on us.
Yeah, and that's starting to come out a lot more in the last few years. And Gabor Mate is an amazing pioneer in kind of just getting trauma out into the mainstream, so people understand that it's not just something that happened during the war or the car accident, but actually it can happen to people that think they've actually had a happy childhood, but suddenly have all of these ailments and all of these symptoms. They can't get themselves out of anxiety, or they have, I mentioned earlier, OCD, or all sorts of different things, and then they start to understand, well, something must have happened in their childhood. And he talks about this really eloquently as well, saying that when you go to a doctor, it's very rare, now a little bit more, but it's very rare that the doctor will ask you what stress is happening in your life. They'll go for the physicality and the symptoms, but they don't really ask you what's happening, what's happening at home, what was your childhood like. And that is a key factor, because whatever happened in childhood is going to have a knock-on effect in everything that happens on later on in life. And it doesn't mean that everybody's had a bad childhood. It's just that it's the way we process things. Everybody's different how they process, and even perceptions and interpretations can have a knock-on effect on somebody.
And actually, I was going to ask you about this, because you mentioned Gabor Mate and kind of trauma-related responses like addiction, OCD. But can we actually get sort of physical illness from trauma? Like not necessarily like a psychologically related illness, but things like diabetes, heart-related problems, or anything else?
Yeah, all sorts of things. Because when we're in that state of survival, what happens is at the back of our brain, where the autonomic nervous system kind of connects, it gets activated. And that releases chemistry into our body in order to prepare us for that fight or flight. And so things like cortisol and adrenaline get released into our body, which are incredibly adaptive if there's a real threat and a danger, right? Because you've heard of mothers picking up cars, having super strength out of nowhere with that adrenaline, or people that just like run away from something after 9/11. It's like, I don't know how I got out of there, but they did. And so all of these chemicals that get released into the body, they have a function and they're really adaptive. But over time, they're maladaptive if they keep getting released, and they become incredibly toxic for everything inside. And so it'll start to affect our immune system, our digestive system. So people with IBS, with Crohn's disease, with all of these sort of issues with the digestive system will have some sort of threat response activation. And that threat response activation, the fact that it keeps happening, has to be from somewhere. And so it's not all this trauma, but there must be that activation. What happened, when it happened, and why does it keep getting activated? And that's going to have a knock-on effect. So yeah, for a lot of people, it can show up physically. MS, I mean, there's a great book from Gavril called When the Body Says No. And he goes into different illnesses and what they mean and what the body, because the body, there's a great quote that says, the body expresses what the mind suppresses. I love that. And so the body is constantly talking to us. There's another amazing book for anybody that wants to look it up. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, which is amazing as well. And it's very much that the body's constantly, it's communicating with us and letting us know what we're not able to see ourselves. And so physical, and sadly, as human beings, we only learn through pain. So the only time we start to question stuff is when we're sick, is when things aren't going well, is when we've gone through a divorce or somebody's died or something really life-changing has changed. But when we're happy, we don't question. So that's the way we kind of work as human beings, but it's also, it's a time to kind of wake up and start to address not just what's happening now or in the future, but what happened in the past to get us to where we are. Yeah.
Wow, there is so much there, and it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate when the body says no. Like for me, a recent example from my life, I was on holiday, a beach holiday with my family. It was quite good. I had rest, some tensions with the family, but nothing major.
Right.
But then I was coming back to London to a job that I really don't enjoy. Immediately, literally the day after my flight, I get sick. I don't know why. I was just recently sick with the flu. And then it seemed really weird that like 2 weeks later, I got sick again. And I was like, this is just my body just rebelled and said no. It just tried to protect itself from a toxic work environment.
Absolutely. And the body, and it's such a shame in a way, because if we were taught as children to listen to our bodies, but what we've been taught is like something's happening, we go straight to the doctor and the doctor gives us pills or whatever it is. And then we just don't address the root cause of why it happened in the first. Obviously, it has its place. If we've broken a knee or we've broken an arm, we need to go to the A&E. But the body's constantly communicating. And we tend to just suppress that and just like take pills and just try and make it go away. But it has a way of finding its way. And it will keep going until you start to listen. Something recently, on a personal note, which is quite funny, is knees. My father has been suffering from his knees, and we did a hypnosis, so it was a little bit advanced, but we went into a hypnosis session, and the hypnosis session was to do with his path in life. And so our knees and our legs has to do with the way, well, our path in life. So anything that happens with the legs is always the body telling us whether we're going in the right direction or we're going in the wrong direction. And that I found absolutely fascinating.
Hang on a second. So you're saying if somebody has some kind of problem in their legs anywhere, that means that you're not going on the right
it could be not
trajectory.
going down, in the right direction. Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting, because I've had actually 2 injuries on my legs. I had a knee sprain and I had a toe injury. Oof, interesting. I never thought about this way.
Yeah, and there's that's another side and another conversation, because it's really fascinating. I got into that years ago when I first did my training in something called QHHT, which is quantum healing hypnosis, a method by Dolores Cannon, which quite a lot of people know about her. But what got me interested in the training was actually her daughter, Julia Cannon, that wrote a book. And I can't really remember the name of it now, but it was very much about each part of the body being a messaging system and telling us what it is that we weren't listening to. And as soon as I read that book, I thought, I need to study this. And so then I went and did the training. And then I found out during the hypnosis session that any time anybody came to me with anything physical, that the body is so literal. It was always kind of giving my clients or the people that would come to me with a message about their body. So having pain in the back had to do with holding on to too much, just taking too much on, just the heaviness of it. Weight was to do with protection. And I'm simplifying it a lot, but there's so many other books being written about this, and it's really, really fascinating. And the body is very, very literal. And you can communicate with it. If we get quiet enough, talk to that part, talk to your knee, talk to that sprained ankle and say, what are you trying to tell me? What do I need to know that I'm not hearing?
Wow.
Yeah.
I also had a guest, Mo Hack, in the podcast, and he is a cancer survivor. Right. And he said during one of his tough nights, he started talking to the cancer and asking cancer what he wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And it talks back to you. We get quiet enough, it's really, and we kind of think, no, that can't be. It's just because we've not been taught that. But it's actually something that probably a lot of civilizations have been doing for a long, long time. And I think since the 1900s, we've just gone down the medical route where we just like take pills and done the pharmaceutical route. But actually, there's so much wisdom within ourselves. I mean, even when we go to the hospital, right, and we get stitched up, but we heal ourselves, right? The healing process is done by our own bodies. I mean, the doctor just puts in the stitches, but that's it. The rest of the healing is us. We have the capacity to heal ourselves, but we also have the capacity to make ourselves sick.
Wow. How does the body talk to us?
Through pain.
Okay.
Through pain, but also if in a meditation, or even if you don't go into meditation, you're not quite there to meditate, but just sit quietly. Just sit quietly in a quiet space and just connect with that part of your body and just say, what do I need to know? What am I not hearing that you're needing to tell me in this way? And the very first thing that comes to you, like the moment that you start to question it, then you've gone into your head and you're trying, but the first thing that comes to you, and I do this with hypnosis, is always your intuition and that part of you that is so wise, always talking to you. But we don't listen to it as much. And a lot of people go back to trauma a little bit, so if I digress it, but people that have gone through trauma or have trauma in their life, and I don't like calling it suffering trauma, they've gone through a traumatic event, they're disconnected. And so listening to their intuition and listening to their gut feeling isn't going to be as easy or as familiar. And so it's training yourself back into doing that. Because when we're disconnected, we don't listen, we're totally disconnected. So it's connecting back with ourselves and listening to that little voice that everybody has, right? That when you didn't listen to it, you're like, I knew it. That's that little voice that we need to start kind of just getting connected with a little bit more each and every day.
And from the spiritual perspective, would you say that voice is our higher self, our soul, cosmic intelligence talking to us?
Whatever you want to call it, yeah. Higher self, the higher subconscious, whatever, there's so many words for it, but it's that inner wisdom that we all have. It's just that we've not been and it's always guiding us. Always guiding us. And we know when things don't flow, and we think, oh, well, I just need to keep going. At some level, that is just not right, but you keep going. But then on other instances, you just know, no matter what everybody else is saying, don't do it. You just have that knowing. And so it's going with that knowing, which is totally different from knowledge. I feel like knowledge is from the mind and knowing is from within, and that knowing is just knows what's right for you. And the more we follow that, the more we're guided.
Wow. And coming back to that gentleman that you mentioned earlier that was shaking after his car accident, how can we actually process our emotions during a traumatic event? And if we haven't done this, then how do we heal subsequently from that trauma?
I think seeking help is one of the first things that you can do. Especially with people that have been in car accidents or in traffic accidents or in major things, there's always people on hand in a sense to kind of help them process that, obviously the A&E and everything else, but it's also good to process it at the level of the mind. Because there's a lot of emotions that are going to come up during most people, they can disconnect totally and they don't even, because our nervous system shuts us down. But just because we're shut down doesn't mean that our body isn't experiencing, and so is accessing that part of the body that did experience, but actually your mind shut you out because it would just been too much for you to have been there. So seeking help, which I don't know, it's probably not the easiest thing for a lot of people. There was, and now I can't remember the name of it, but there's like a cartoon, the horse, the boy, and Did you ever see it? No?
Not
the
sure.
mole, and I don't know what it's called, but he asked the boy, or the boy asked the horse, like, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do? And the horse replies, ask for help. And that is so spot on. We just don't know how to ask for help. And I think asking for that help and having somebody listen, or therapy, whatever it is, just somebody for you to be able to process what just happened, rather than just stiff up lip and I'll just get on with it, because it does come back, and you'll see it. You'll see it coming up in your body through an illness, or through things, not in behaviors, or in patterns in relationships, that you keep getting into the same relationship. Abusive relationships, you don't need to be physically ill or anything like that, but you keep getting into an abusive relationship. Where does that come from? It must come from something in childhood that you keep going back to, what you knew, or what you, I don't know. There's always something. Nothing's ever random. So it's understanding that if something's not flowing in your life, just to kind of sit back and say, what do I need to know about this? And treating everything, if you can, a little bit as a mirror that is trying to tell you something. And it's not about blaming ourselves, there's something wrong with me, but it's like, if it's in me and I'm the common denominator, then I can do something about it. I think it's more empowering that way. But yeah, seeking help is a big one, but not an easy one.
Would that be fair to say we are a mirror, for example, with abusive relationships? That means that within me there is some kind of belief that says it's okay to accept this kind of treatment?
It could be.
And then because you have this belief, this is mirroring out externally with you entering those relationships. And you'll keep entering those relationships until you break free and change within, and then external reality will change as well.
Well, it's always from within, it is without, right? How we see the world, how we interact with the world is through our own experience and through our own internal state. And if we go back a little bit to what we were talking about, trauma, what I love to kind of tell people is that the state that we're in is going to determine how we interact with the outside world. If you're in a state of survival, you're going to be closed off. You're going to be protective. You're going to be shut off from the world. I'm victim mode. Everyone's against me. You're going to be in fight mode. It's going to look like being grumpy, being short-tempered, being just ready to kind of, like somebody says something and just being snappy. If you're in flight mode, you're just disconnected. Not physically probably, but just probably emotionally. You're there, but you're not there. So you're just not present. And when you change your state and you're in a state of calm, you're not in that dysregulated state, and your nervous system is a lot calmer, then you're going to be more open. You're going to be more loving, more understanding, more compassionate, more kind. And then the way that you're going to see your past is going to be totally different, because you're going to, I see why that happened, rather than victim mode. So changing our state already changes how we perceive everything that's happening and how we interact with everything. So that's a good thing, because we can't change people. We can't change what happened. We can't change governments or financial situation, or sometimes so many things we have no control over, but we have absolute control over what's happening inside of us. And if we can understand that it starts with us, then we can take back our power and change the inside, and you change the outside.
Wow.
But that's the hardest part, though.
Yeah, it's very scary and a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
And then once you are in therapy, once you've asked for help, what are some practical ways how therapists deal with processing and releasing the trauma?
Right. Well, what I've found I've been doing this for about 8 years, is that the key element to working through trauma is addressing the body. When I first trained, I thought it was just at the level of the mind, but there's the key element that the body is very much connected to the mind. So if we address, we're body, mind, and soul. And so if we just address one, then the other two are going to be completely out of balance. And if we just go to the mind and just talk and talk and talk, but actually don't address that activation, then it's going to take a little bit longer. It's just going to feel that you're not making headway, because if you get activated or triggered, then you go into that state again. And so addressing the body, any type of therapy that addresses the body, is really, really key.
What kind of therapy?
Well, there's so many at the moment. There's like somatic therapy. There's the one that I do called compassionate inquiry. There's a lot of more modalities coming out now that are starting to address the body. And I'm not saying that the type of therapies like CBT or anything like that are not good. They're really amazing. But for some people with certain types of trauma, it's really, really key for them to address the body. And if you address the body and then go and address the mind, things are going to be a lot easier, because if your mind and your body are kind of in balance, then the soul follows. Right? And so a little bit of what they call a spiritual bypass, and people's like, oh, I've done all the spiritual and I've done all the I don't know, the meditation and all of this, but then they're not doing the emotional stuff and they're not doing the body work. And so something's going to be completely out of balance. And so doing all three at some level is really key. So addressing all levels for that trauma to be able to be processed. It's not getting rid of the trauma. It's about processing and addressing that dysregulation. And that's how you take back your power.
How do you that you've successfully addressed this dysregulation?
You don't get triggered as much. Or you still get triggered, but you don't stay activated as long. Like people that just like, this person did this to me and then all of this, and they just stay angry and they stay resentful and they stay in that state, or they stay in that state of fear, of anxiety, of protectiveness, because anxiety has to do with the future. So anything uncertain and unknown is going to be a cause of threat and danger. And so they're either stuck in the future in anxiety, or they're stuck in the past in that depression, and they don't get out of it. And so they haven't really processed that because they're not in the present moment. And so being more present, addressing the body, befriending your body, and understanding like, right, I know now I'm being triggered, and how do I know? Because I'm starting to sweat, for example. For some people it's like, oh, I can feel that in my chest. I can feel the palpitations. I can feel tension in my jaw. I can feel that my whole body is just tense. And even some people will just be sitting there. I don't know if you've seen people in the tube with it. That's the nervous system activated.
Yeah,
they're holding. Yeah. They're just not able to kind of release that. So the moment that you're calm, then you're in control. Whilst otherwise you're in a state of activation. There's another thing that's really interesting, is that trauma is stressful, but not all stress is traumatic. So just because you get stressed doesn't mean that you have trauma. It's when you're in a chronic state of stress and activation, then you have an issue. And so addressing it and working with the body, releasing that. And you can do releasing through, there's yoga, I mean, there's so many things at the moment, breath work, so many other different things that are available right now that weren't there years and years ago. But there's a lot more that you can do in order to address the body. We need to go into the body first. I think that that's really key. And I've seen from my clients, the biggest changes are the people that work with their body and then address the mind.
Wow. And I'd love for our culture to accept that a bit more. Because when I look at the university students, the high stressful jobs like finance or anything like this, the stress is accepted as normal and as part of the job.
Glorified in a way as well, right?
Yeah.
It's like the more you work and the more... But actually, I think it's all changing. It's starting to change because, coming back, we were talking earlier about working in the city and in that stressful environment. It was kind of like, people say, oh, you burn out, you're going to burn out. And I was like, what does that even mean? I now understand what they mean. They couldn't just keep going at that pace. But it was almost like the more hours you worked and the more you did and the more you showed up, everybody thought you were, but actually it had a knock-on effect, because then they started getting really sick, or they started getting all sorts of different issues, and people started to realize. Then now, if you go to the city, I know people that work in the city now, they're now more healthy. Else before, everybody's out drinking and partying, and now everybody's like health free. They all go to the gyms, they all go to Pilates, yoga. When I was in, it wasn't like that at all. Everybody was just out hardcore drinking, and it was just party, and it's just that has a knock-on effect. So I think now people are starting to realize that it's really important to look after themselves, and that's stress. It is good to have some stress because it gives you that rush of adrenaline, but not in a chronic state.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'd love for the society to change in a more health conscious way, both mentally, emotionally, and physically and spiritually, and kind of put the health first. I really like the biohackers now out there online, and people that are really like, no, like, this is my health. Let's reverse the biological age. Let's take care of ourselves first and our body and our health. The cost is too high if you think about this. I was speaking to somebody and they said that most CEOs, that is their trauma response, because you have to give up so much. You have to give up your kids, you have to give up your health, your friends, and all sorts of things. And just like looking back at it, I wonder how many people think it was worth it. Of course, there's sometimes a greater mission. It depends on why you're doing what you're doing. But man, I think as a society, we need to rethink our values majorly.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting because I mentioned my father before, but he worked in palliative care, worked with the dying, and he always said to me that people die the way they lived. So if their lives were chaotic, then their deaths are going to be chaotic. And nobody goes for the car. Nobody's like, when they died, it's like, bring me my Ferrari. None of that. All of that becomes totally irrelevant. And the people that dedicated themselves to work, and actually forgot about themselves and the relationships around them, die very much on their own.
Wow.
So what's their legacy? What was all of that for? But it's starting to change, I think. And I think the pandemic woke up a lot of people to understand that they needed to start to look after themselves and realize that, yeah, they were being really affected, because then they didn't have that outlet, right, to go and meet with their friends, and they were left with themselves. And for a lot of people, it was quite a shock to kind of be with themselves. And so it's brought really good things, but I think it's changing. I'm really hopeful.
Me too.
Definitely, definitely.
So you've actually mentioned an importance of kind of addressing different bodies differently, and like making sure that they're all addressed. So the physical body, the emotional body, mind body, the mental body. And also I'd love to touch on the spiritual body with you.
Sure.
What is, from the spiritual perspective, what is the reason for having trauma, and how can we heal spiritually?
It has to do with lessons, and at some level, and this might be a bit of a weird concept, but we do choose even those traumas, even in this life. And so we come in with a plan, and we choose who we're going to be surrounded with and what experiences we're going to live in order to learn. And sometimes some of those, what we call traumas, might not even be only for us, but it might be that we play a part in somebody else's experience as well. And so I know it's a little bit out there, but at the level of the soul, we come into to have experience. We come into this earth, which is duality, in order to experience both. That's what earth is all about. This is about darkness and light, and it's about what we say bad and good, but we have to know one or the other. We have to know sadness, otherwise how would we appreciate happiness? There's got to be that duality, and most people don't want to have that duality, but that's what we're here. That's the learning, that's the evolution of our soul. And so what we call trauma is just an experience for the soul that it's needing to go through in order to evolve. And it could be lifetimes of different experiences, and we probably had lifetimes of being raped and pillaged, and because it was a horrific time for so many, right, for so long. So our soul has been going through all of different experiences, and each one has been chosen in order to evolve and to go back to its source. But that's the whole point of the soul, to just go through these. I wouldn't call them trauma as such at the level of the soul. I would just, it's more of an experience, different experience. And that's how we learn.
Wow.
Yeah.
For people who are interested to learn more about this concept, I recommend Michael Newton's book, Journey of Souls.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Dolores Cannon's work as well.
So many, yeah. Dolores Cannon's got so many books on this, and yeah, past life regression, and even Brian Weiss has got some books about this. Yeah, and I know that not many people are into past life regression. It's just a different experience. We call it, it's not so important. I remember when I used to get clients at the beginning of my work, it's like, I want to know if I was Cleopatra, for example, in a past life. And my question was, what will it do for you to know that? Like, what will you get out of it? Why does it matter if you were, if you weren't? And it was almost like a badge of honor if they were. But actually, most people that would go into a past life would have very normal, very kind of not noteworthy lives, like a little girl in a little village that just didn't have very much food, and it was experiences that they needed to go through in order to transcend onto the next stage of the soul. There's a great, and this is a little bit old, but I don't know if you've heard of Shirley MacLaine. Mm-mm. So she's an actress. She was the sister of Warren Beatty. I don't know if you've heard of him. Anyway,
no.
They were like actors, but she became awakened and went into past life kind of regression, and she wrote a couple of books. There's a book called Out on the Limb that kind of follows her kind of awakening to all of this sort of stuff and goes out to Peru. And she then writes another book called Dancing in the Light, and it's fascinating about her past lives and how her husband's in this life, how they've come to be in this life, and they were connected in different lives. And I think in one of them, she was the father and he was the son, the daughter. We come in different roles, but it's really, really fascinating. And it's just, yeah, it's about just different experiences. So I wouldn't call them trauma, and even trauma here is just a different experience.
Wow. I love all of this stuff. And
it's
also
really fascinating.
I know, it's just like once you start learning and
it's
going,
like a little rabbit hole. Once you go down and you find something totally, yeah.
And also just to go back to your example of like if something is wrong with your legs, maybe that's a sign you're not on the right path. How does it relate it? Because I know sometimes you can also have sort of physical problems that are carried through past lives.
Right.
How like do the two interact?
Yeah, and that's really interesting as well, because whenever I've done regressions, people have come with literally a knee problem or something physical, thinking that it's from this life, and it was from a different life that they've just kind of carried through, but wasn't processed. And it had a message as well. So it always carries a message, even if it's from a different life. It's always carrying a message, and it's kind of energy in a sense, and it's always trying to tell us something, whether from this life, and just allowing or letting go of anger or resentment, or through forgiveness, they've been able to just let go and just release that, and then it's just not hurt them anymore. Even birthmarks are really interesting. I've seen birthmarks disappear on people.
What?
I know, that's so insane.
In front of your eyes, or?
Well, yeah, just like they had, and they wanted to know what it was all about. And then in a different life, they'd been killed in a certain way, and that's where the birthmark was. And then after a few days, they kind of sent me a picture, and it said that it had disappeared.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it was just processing that death and letting go, because they died in a traumatic. I'm not saying that everyone is the same, but I found it really fascinating that there is nothing random. There really literally is nothing that is random or a coincidence, or it's just the way it is. There's always a reason for all of it. And it's going through that journey or that inquiry and getting curious.
Wow.
That there's a message there. Yeah, it's really cool.
To bring us out of the spiritual rabbit hole and go back to the regular life a little bit.
Yeah, let's go back to the regular life.
How, for an average person, how do you actually manage stress and make sure that the effects from the stress are minimized for yourself?
That's a really good question. So there's so many more things out there now in order to regulate your nervous system. So befriending your body, understanding how those triggers manifest would be a really good step. I do something called self-regulation, and I kind of teach it, and I used to do it in my group sessions. And I do that with every client that I have now, because I find that understanding what the mind-body connection and understanding what stress is, understanding how our nervous system works and how it affects our day-to-day is key. Once you understand what's happening at the level of your body and why you're in fight or flight, or even when you're in fight or flight, then bringing in some exercises in order to regulate that nervous system is going to be key. There's, again, so many out there, but it's about finding something that feels right for you. For a lot of people, it could be breathing, that box breathing, whether you inhale for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and then you hold for 4. That's one way. The other people use the box breathing as inhale for 4, exhale for 4. So whichever way works for you, but the whole point of it is to just regulate your nervous system. And that's how you get to manage stress, by awareness that you are in stress, first of all, and second, finding exercises and tools that you can implement in your everyday life in order to regulate that nervous system. That's going to be absolutely key. Obviously, meditation is amazing, but what I've found, and the reason that I was doing my group sessions, was that a lot of people couldn't meditate, and they really wanted to get into it, but couldn't understand why it was just so hard. And it was because their body was activated. And so trying to calm the mind when your body is activated is quite the challenge, because your mind is going to be trying to understand what's happening out there, because your body is in a state of survival. And so if we go to the body first and do bodyfulness and connect to the body and calm the body down, then the mind follows, rather than the other way around. And then mindfulness becomes a lot easier. Meditation becomes a lot easier.
Do we calm the body?
Just through breathing. Through a really good one is tensing your muscles and then releasing the tension in your muscles, because it's all about muscle tension. When you're in activation, you're constantly. It's why a lot of people have got like huge problems with their shoulders, with their neck, with their jaw. Is literally their whole body is constricted, is in dysregulation, and it is just tense, and it's releasing that tension. And for a lot of people, it's like chronic, where they don't even realize that they're that tense. And then they have issues with their sleep, then they have issues where they can't sleep very well, they keep getting it will have a knock-on effect being in that state of stress. All stress is, rather than calling it stress, is your threat response activation. You're in survival. That's what stress is. And obviously we do need to be, we can't get rid of it, because at some point we do. It's always scanning. Our nervous system will always be scanning to make sure that we are okay. It's in service of our survival. So we can't get rid of it, but we can interrupt it enough to bring ourselves back into balance, and then be able to kind of deal with whatever. So it means the difference between us being reactive and us being responsive, and that's huge.
Wow, that is indeed huge. And so once you're experiencing those stressful situations, then I don't know, you find a quiet place, a quiet moment, and you self-regulate by doing breathing exercises, by tensing, by meditating. You find whatever works for you, and you implement this in your routine to make sure that you're A, less stressed, and then B, you're not carrying the severe consequences of the stress into your life.
Right, yeah. It's going to have a knock-on effect the more you regulate. And it's not something that we're taught, sadly. It's something that we should be getting really from our own caregivers. And that's how children and babies get their regulation, right? From their mother, from a calm, soothing voice, from a beautiful gaze, from a smile. All of this regulation, we get that from the people around us. But if somebody was shouting at us, or somebody was angry or disconnected from us, how regulated is that child going to be? They're not going to be. And then they don't teach that at schools, and they're starting to a little bit more now, but they don't really teach it at school. So we're growing up in a state of total dysregulation, and we're not even aware of it. For example, I come from Colombia, so you can imagine how dysregulated that society is. We were constantly, my mum would be like, watch, we're going to get mugged, we're going to get this, and watch that. So we were like this, constantly tense. And that's how we grew up. And for me, it was normal. And my kids say to me, it's like, oh, every time they walk into the room, it's like, you're always startled. It's like, we can never walk in and you don't just like jump up, what's going on? That's just my nervous system. And I don't think I'll ever get rid of that to that state, but I learned to manage it. That it's just like, okay, there's nothing to worry about. Like, I'm good. I keep telling myself, like, we're good, we're safe. There's nothing that I need to do about this right now. And then you learn to kind of just regulate and bring yourself into safety. That's probably the best way. If people find, well, what does regulation mean? Bringing yourself back into safety. And people that have been through trauma and experienced trauma, it's really not that easy, or can be challenging to feel that safety within their body, because their body is just constantly scanning. That nervous system is in constant state of survival. And to be honest, for the nervous system, it's got 100% track record that it's got them through. And so it'll keep getting activated. Why? Because that person is still alive and is still there. So as far as the nervous system is concerned, it's like, well, Brownie got through that, so she's going to be. But it doesn't know that you're not back there in that situation anymore, or that as that 5-year-old or as that 3-year-old. So that nervous system is going to keep getting activated anytime there's a trigger or a smell or anything that might even remind it of that instant when that trauma happened. It's going to keep getting activated. So as we get older, it's now then our responsibility to right? The ability to respond totally different. But that comes with awareness. And it's a work in progress. Even me, like, I've been teaching this for a while, and some days I get it, and some days, not so much.
Wow, I'm in a similar boat. I definitely think I'm definitely more aware than a regular person, I'd say, just because of all the meditation and the spiritual work that I do, and the therapy and all those kind of things, and listening to podcasts and reading books about psychology, self-development, self-help, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what is painful for me is being aware of this chronic state of fight or flight and not being able to deal with it necessarily.
Right.
For me, that's even more painful, because then I was in a blissful, ignorant state. Right now, I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm being chased by a tiger, but I can't do anything about this. And this is quite painful for me because I'm aware of this. So I need to go the extra step and actually learn to deal with this correctly. I'm on my journey of doing it, but it's still not there, which is fine. It's a journey.
It is.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting there.
And I have to say that, I don't know if this helps, it's not about getting rid of these parts of us, but about befriending them. And I think that's the key. Wow. And as and when they show up, it's like, okay, how come you're still showing up? Or what are you trying to tell me? Or even finding that compassion within ourselves. It's like, does that part know that we're not there anymore? How old does that part think you are? Does it still think you're 3? Does it still think? And if you ask it, you'll be amazed that it will answer you. If you say to it, how do you think I am right now? And it'll say 3. And you're like, what? But I'm not. It's like, what are you talking about? Because consciously, obviously, we're not. But literally that activation, and it could be anything. And what does that 3-year-old within you need in that moment? What would you give any 3-year-old? And if you're able to do that, and then keep doing that, that's how we kind of like... So there's work with therapy, but there's also getting to know ourselves, getting to know all of these parts of us that are there to protect us in some way, and that are there to teach us and show us so many aspects that we consciously don't know about. So yeah.
Wow. In the last few moments of the episode, I'd love to touch on hypnosis with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you are a hypnotherapist, and I've done a few guided hypnosis sessions with you.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of hypnosis, specifically when it comes to your subconscious and accessing memories that you consciously might not remember, but your subconscious still holds?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really, really good question. The best way that I can kind of answer that question is by explaining how the subconscious and the conscious mind works, if that's okay. So if you can imagine that your brain's divided in 2, you've got your conscious mind, which is 5%, and you've got the subconscious, which is 95%. So pretty much for all of us as human beings, the subconscious runs the show, right? And they say that it gets programmed roughly in the last trimester in our mother's womb and the first 7 years of our life. So there's this saying in different kind of religions, and they say, give me the boy till 7 or the child till 7 and I'll give you the man. And what it means is that so many things get programmed in that first 7 years. We learn to walk, to talk, to eat. We're taking on information from culture, religion, society. All of that starts to form that subconscious and what they call the personality. And then after the 7 years, the way it gets programmed is through repetition. So the way you learn to drive, you first got in the car and you think, oh my God, I'm never going to remember all of this. And then the more you repeated it, you don't get into the car, you don't even need to think about it. Maths, times table, riding a bike, swimming, all of the stuff that you learned and you had to repeat and now you don't think about because it's just in your subconscious. Then that goes into that programming. But then for many people, that subconscious program carries a lot of disempowering, self-sabotaging habits, beliefs, behaviors, coping mechanisms, all sorts of different things that were being programmed at a time where our brain hadn't quite developed, right? Our cognitive brain was just developing. And so it started to show up for people later on in life that we were talking about earlier at a physical level or an emotional level. And so the way that hypnosis works is that it bypasses the conscious mind and it goes directly into the subconscious to understand what happened, when it happened, and why it happened. And then the how becomes easier. So that's why hypnosis is so powerful, because consciously we might think, well, I know what happened and it's because, I don't know, my mum did this, so I got locked in the room, or I got punished for this. But that's the 5%. And then the subconscious goes, it wasn't that you got locked up in the room or that you were punished. It was that you thought, you believed that you weren't worthy, or you believed that you weren't good enough, or you believed that you weren't loved. That's the real root, and only you're going to be able to access that through the subconscious, because that's the one that holds the program. It's like going into the whole program of it. And then if you get to change it at that level, then that's powerful. So sometimes when we go to talk therapy, we could talk and talk and talk, or we read the book, or we watch the video or the podcast, and you're like, oh, I got it. You're like, right? But that's the 5%. And then when you're not in present awareness because you're in the future in anxiety, or you're stuck in the past replaying old hurts and old pain, then you default to the program and the program keeps running. And so the 5% that learned the new thing on the podcast and everything kind of like completely goes out the window, and you're like, but I knew it. And so it's hypnosis is powerful in that sense, that it goes into the subconscious and is able to bypass that conscious mind. And it's a sleep of the nervous system. It's perfectly safe. It's there's no side effects whatsoever. So the worst harm, you just come back to and you just open your eyes. I can't make you do anything you don't want to do. I can't make you say anything that you don't want to say. So all these things like, oh, you're going to make me. You can't make anybody do anything. And the people, like the hypnotic shows, there's people specifically that have signed up. And you can see that some people are more suggestible than others. But when you're in a hypnosis, in a therapeutic kind of a setting, you're going there to address something. And so at some level, your subconscious knows what it needs to show you, what scenes it needs to show you, and what it is. Because again, nothing's random. So the fact that you're there is because you're ready.
How do you're actually in your subconscious if you're being hypnotized? How do you not mistake it for your conscious mind?
A little bit like the intuition that we were talking about earlier, and that voice, and talking to that voice. The one that doubts, the one that's kind of like not sure, the one is like, oh, is it? And starts to question, criticize, judge, critique. That's the conscious mind. Then you're not. The one that just knows that it knows, and it will just say it out loud, and even it might not even make any sense. Then you're deep. Yeah.
If my mind or somewhere in my head there is something that doesn't make any sense, it's likely that it's my subconscious giving me clues.
You see it, you say it out loud, you say the very first thing that comes to you, and then as soon as you say it, it's like, that didn't make any sense, but you're like, oh, actually it does. So yeah, but it's a sleep of the nervous system. It's about surrendering and also allowing yourself to go deeper into that inquiry. Yeah. And so sometimes when people say, oh, can everybody be hypnotized? Everybody can be hypnotized, and everybody is in a state of hypnosis anyway. It's like we're taking on all of these suggestions from the outside world and what we should do with our lives and what we shouldn't. It's just that we get to give ourselves better suggestions.
Yeah.
And change beliefs and habits and behaviors that actually may have been adaptive when we were younger, but then they became maladaptive as we get older, and they start to hurt us. And we take back our power. So hypnosis can be really powerful and a lot quicker than probably talk therapy. That's why it's because it just bypasses that conscious mind that could just be saying anything because it just thinks it knows, but actually it doesn't.
We're almost at time. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. And this is such a rich kind of topic. But I think that the body is the key. And for anybody just looking into how to regulate their body and connecting with their body is really, really important. But no, that's it, I think.
Yvie, it's been a pleasure.
Always. Thank you.
Where can people find you?
So people can find me through my website, which is yviesanchez.com, Yvie with a Y. And I'm on Instagram, Yvie Sanchez Therapy. And there you could just connect through my website and all the details are there. Yeah.
Amazing. It's been an eye-opening conversation. Thank you so, so much.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me.